The show begins with an underwater eruption that appears to be unleashing a hidden entity. On the surface, we can see an oil rig named Kinloch Bravo in the middle of the ocean. Many workers have been there for months, and they are finally returning home. We then see a goofy employee named Baz, who is playing video games and is excited to board the chopper back home. Moments later, the offshore manager of the rig, Magnus, receives a call from his superiors. He is told that a power failure has delayed the choppers, leaving them stuck for a while. Magnus is upset and asks when they are coming to pick up his employees, but before he can get any response, the phone abruptly cuts out. Meanwhile, the entire communication system at the location goes down, leaving them unable to contact anyone. This is perfect for Baz, who just wants to play video games. After this, Magnus calls in a meeting and announces that the choppers are not coming to pick them up at the moment. This causes everyone to become really worried. One of the older men, named Hutton, is particularly difficult and demands to know when they're returning home. He begins to chastise Magnus and blames him for all their problems. Suddenly, the power goes out, causing panic among everyone. The communication officer named Fulmer heads to the power room and discovers that all the generators have unexpectedly stopped working. With no other options, the crew has to rely on backup batteries for the time being. Magnus is worried and attempts to contact a rescue ship, only to find that the radio is also down. Shortly after, the entire rig begins to shake violently, and the production module begins to catch fire. Magnus then commands for the module to be shut down immediately. The onboard scientist Rose objects because their quota is not fulfilled yet, and it could cost the company financially. However, Magnus responds that the safety of employees is more important to him than the company's finances. Surprisingly good morals. Magnus is going to die for sure. Even after shutting down the drills, another series of powerful tremors shakes the area. The group then looks out and observes a dense wave of fog rapidly approaching them. Panicked, Fulmer states that no chopper is coming for them in this fog. The workers then return inside because it's impossible to navigate the lifeboat in such weather. Afterward, Magnus decides that the only way they can survive is to establish communication. Therefore, he assigns Fulmer to inspect the radio tower and make the necessary repairs. He decides to send Baz as well, although he is a bit inexperienced. After a while, Hutton arrives and warns Magnus that climbing the radio tower is too dangerous, but the latter insists that there is no other option. Hutton also tells Baz that he does not have to go, but Baz believes he may be able to reclaim his chopper seat with this. Magnus then offers to give him his seat if he manages to fix it. After this, Baz climbs the ladder, with Fulmer following closely behind him. At one point, he gets nervous and can't see Fulmer below him. He is then startled by a bird and nearly falls, but is saved by his harness. Later, while Fulmer works on the equipment, Baz begins to taunt him, claiming that he was bumped for the spot on the chopper because he is dating Rose. He then insults Fulmer, suggesting that getting close to her won't help in the long run, as she will be moving up while he will be left on his own again. This movie is trying to depict gamers as assholes. It's not true. Hearing this, Fulmer becomes infuriated and pushes Baz against the rail, demanding that he shut up his nonsense. Once he gets the equipment working, the duo prepares to leave. Baz accidentally drops the voltmeter, but an angry Fulmer leaves him behind and proceeds to descend. In the meantime, Magnus and Hutton are standing below the radio tower, arguing with each other. Suddenly, they're shocked when Baz's body crashes to the ground. Magnus calls for help, and a worried Rose rushes down to the spot. She is visibly relieved to find Fulmer still standing. The latter then explains that Baz was descending after him, but he doesn't know what happened. Following this, a medic named Kat arrives and takes Baz to the infirmary. She claims that he needs to be transferred to the mainland hospital as his injuries are internal. Hutton demands that Kat fix him up, but she insists that she can only stabilize him and keep him comfortable until he can be transferred. Hearing this, an enraged Hutton begins knocking objects around the room before storming out in anger. In the control room, Fulmer attempts to contact the Coast Guard but receives no reply. When Rose arrives to see him, he confesses that he feels guilty for not being able to protect Baz. She consoles him and states he should have seen it coming because Baz already slipped on the way up. Fulmer tells her that just before the accident, they were arguing because Baz was talking badly about their relationship. Upon hearing this, Rose kisses him and reassures him that Baz's accident is not his fault. She's not suspicious at all, which is, in itself, suspicious. Later, as Kat is leaving the restroom, she is suddenly attacked by an enraged Hutton. He begins to choke her and demands that Baz recover at any cost. Kat who is an army medic, quickly pins the aggressive man down and leaves him on the floor. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Baz slowly regains consciousness and sees a vision of what happened underneath the water, which was shown in the first scene. Later, Hutton rushes to see Magnus and blames him for the incident. He demands that Magnus call the Navy or do whatever it takes to get a helicopter, but Magnus realizes that there's no point in arguing with him, so he quietly exits the room. Following this, Hutton begins going through Magnus's documents and discovers a confidential file. After some time, Hutton arrives at the helipad and begins to make a huge scene. He gathers all of the workers and claims that Magnus is keeping a big secret and making excuses about fog and bad weather. He accuses Magnus of sending Baz up the tower because he was scared of something. Hutton urges him to start telling the truth before he shows them the confidential file. Having no other option, Magnus steps up and informs everyone that their company has planned to decommission the entire Kinloch field and terminate every employee. They didn't want him to reveal this, fearing the employees would start quitting before the decommissioning process. Magnus says his priority is now to get them home, and that is what he is going to do. Before the shocked workers can process the information, tiny particles start falling from the sky, which look like snow, but are actually ash. Just then, an injured Baz appears, and to their surprise, they discover that his previously broken body has miraculously healed. He appears distressed, so the workers rush to his aid and give him a jacket. Baz then begins claiming that it is too late because it is already begun. He then loses consciousness again, so the other workers take him to the infirmary. Shortly after, he awakens and finds himself on the stretcher. Rose inquires about what he was saying on the helipad, but Baz claims that he has no recollection. He simply states that there was something out in the fog and that he has been hearing voices in his head. Kat then tries to take a blood sample from him, which makes him angry. He becomes aggressive and refuses to cooperate, but the girls restrain him and manage to take his blood anyway. At this point, Baz appears terrified and claims that a massive wave is on its way. After the others leave, he examines his wound and notices some shiny objects that appear to hasten the healing process. Outside the control room, the team notices a light that is flashing from below. A worker named Lek goes out and recognizes it as Morse code sent by the standby vessel. The crew then realizes that the message is a pan, or possible assistance needed, repeated multiple times. Magnus instructs Fulmer to respond to the message by flashing lights across the deck to establish communication with the ship's crew. Meanwhile, we see that Hutton is confined to a room to keep him from causing further disruptions. In the medical room, Baz discovers that his wounds have miraculously healed. When he looks at himself in the mirror, he sees the vision of the rig being destroyed. He then leaves the room and changes into his uniform. Suddenly, he gets a severe headache and his gold tooth falls out. Afterward, the superiors are discussing the decommissioning when Kat rushes in to inform them that Baz is missing. Meanwhile, an older employee named Alwyn finds Baz in a cabin, drawing strange symbols on the window and rambling about something. The old man asks what is happening, and Baz explains that his head is full of noises and that he shouldn't have survived the accident. Suddenly, the room lights start flickering, and Baz has another scary vision, causing him to run away. Elsewhere, Lek is freezing and needs to warm up, so he sneaks into Kat's clinic and drinks some rubbing alcohol. Whoa! He then steps into the shower, but soon after, his entire body begins to hurt. His chest tattoos start to fade, and his eyes, palms, and body begin to bleed. Lex screams in agony as blood continues to flow through his pores. A while later, an employee arrives to deliver Lex dinner, but discovers him dead in the shower. She promptly informs her superiors, who are appalled by the situation. Kat tries to determine the cause of death, but is unsuccessful, so she concludes that he died from blood loss. Just then, a worker approaches them and shows them Baz's golden tooth. Rose then speculates that those exposed to the ash in the air have been infected with the substance. She states that the substance removes impurities from the body. This explains why Baz's dental fillings came out and why Lex's tattoos were stripped. His Prince Albert also fell out, but no one wants to talk about that. Moments later, they spot an unfamiliar light outside that doesn't appear to be from the ship. Alwyn and Fulmer team up to investigate, and during this time, Fulmer accidentally injures his hand. Meanwhile, Hutton manages to escape from his room and starts roaming the hallways, determined to find a way out. He heads straight for the communications room and sends an SOS signal to the standby vessel. However, it turns out to be a grave mistake, as the zero visibility could cause the standby vessel to crash into the rig. Shortly after, Magnus learns of this and rushes to the control room with other employees, seeing the havoc Hutton has caused. Fulmer gets angry and the two almost get into a fight. However, Magnus intervenes and orders them to focus on the situation at hand. He wants them to send a message to the vessel to correct its course. An announcement is then made to the entire crew, informing them to return to the platform and remain there until further instruction. Meanwhile, Alwyn locates Baz in the lower part of the deck and becomes concerned for him. He quickly approaches Baz and implores him to come back. However, the latter refuses, saying that he wants to see the creature of water that is causing all of this. Alwyn then gets closer, but Baz becomes aggressive and starts choking him. Then he begins spitting water into Alwyn's mouth in a hideous way. But before he can kill the poor guy, someone arrives there, causing Baz to run away. Following this, Alwyn collapses to the ground, unconscious. Magnus and the other employees rush to his aid and attempt to revive him, but their efforts are in vain. Kat examines him and concludes that Alwyn appears to have passed away due to drowning, which is impossible. Devastated by the sight, Magnus breaks down in tears and feels guilty that 2 of his employees died on the same day, and he couldn't do anything. On the other hand, Rose conducts experiments with the ash to better understand its reactivity with various materials. Later, she meets Magnus and reveals that the substance is not ash, but rather living organisms such as parasites. These organisms infiltrate the host and remove impurities from it. She claims that people with injuries or who have been exposed to the ash for an extended period of time are more vulnerable to these particles. The scene then shifts to a concerned Fulmer inspecting his injured hand, and then to Baz, who is eerily staring at the water.